about some pots for the patio? I think the first thing to consider is size. If they're too small, you'll end up watering them all the time. They might not even survive the day on one watering. So a good compromise is something that's about 12 to 14 inches. That holds enough compost probably to make it last all day with just one watering. But it also has advantages. You can pick it up and move it. So for instance, you could have spring bulbs in this. When they're finished flowering, you can move them to a sheltered part of the garden, grow them on, bring them back out next spring. So for instance, we grew dahlias in patio pots, let them flower through the summer. When they die down, put them in the garage for the winter, bring them out again in the spring, and they flower every year in the same pot. You don't need to do anything to them. So this size of pot has an advantage, is that you can move it around. You can go into bigger pots. The problem you've got then is you can't really move them about. They get too heavy. So then you have to consider things like frost protection. Will the pot survive freezing? Is the drainage good enough as well? So what we usually find is that plastic pots have 3 or 4 drainage holes in the bottom, usually have quite reasonable drainage. But when you get to ceramic pots, only one tiny hole. And then what can happen is that the bottom of the pot will get very wet in the winter or freeze and actually crack the pot. So when you get to bigger pots that you can't move, you should consider drainage and shape. So this kind of shape, when it freezes, the compost lifts out of the pot, so it won't crack the pot. If you've got something like this in ceramic with a flat sides, what you'll find is that the ice, when it forms, can't lift out the pot and has to go sideways. So these are slightly more prone to cracking. So the shape of your pot, your permanent pots, is quite important if you're going to keep them outside in the garden over the winter. Anything that you can pick up and carry, no problem. You can put it in the garage or the greenhouse for the winter. Plastic pots, still very popular. And I think the reason is they're cheap to produce and cheap to sell. But they are a good option. All of these pots have been made from recycled material. And when you're finished with them, they can go back into recycling and could be made into pots again. Perhaps one of the best reasons for using plastic is it's very lightweight. So you can pick up your pots and move them about. They're also resistant to frost. They are very unlikely to freeze and crack in the frost. You can get a paint finish and different finishes, and now a plastic pot can last 8 or 9 years. Perhaps the main reason for using plastic pots is you get much better drainage. So they have more holes at the bottom, so it's very unlikely that your plant will be standing in water in the winter. Clay pots. Once upon a time, the only kind of patio pot you could have. You can still buy clay pots now, and they do make very attractive outdoor containers. There are still a few problems. They can still crack in the frost. The shape of it is important. So this one's got sloping sides, so if this pot froze, it would lift out of the pot. So a bell-shaped clay pot is more likely to crack in the frost than, say, a traditional flower pot shape. They are quite heavy, so you can't really move them once you've planted them. And perhaps the biggest problem with clay pots is damages. When we were buying pallets of clay pots from Italy, it'd be quite common to get 10–20% broken pots on the pallet by the time they got to us. So clay pots are quite fragile and will easily break. But the biggest problem probably with clay pots is the drainage. You only have one tiny little hole in the bottom. When this is sitting on the ground, it's very easy for it to block. So at the bottom of the pot will be sitting wet, and in the winter that's the bit that's most likely to crack. So the answer is to use gravel at the bottom and lift the pot a tiny bit off the ground so that the water can drain away. Ceramic, a very popular choice for outdoor patio pots. They're available in a wide range of colours and shapes. They're a bit like clay pots. They suffer from a problem of not having enough drainage. So you need to make sure that you buy the pot feet, or you just lift your pot a little bit off the ground to make sure the water can drain away. Use some gravel in the base as well. Not all ceramic pots are the same. You can be fired at quite a low temperature and not be frostproof, or they can be fired at a very high temperature and be frostproof. So when you're buying your pots, make sure you're looking for a frost guarantee, so that the manufacturer is guaranteeing that they will survive frosty weather. The shape has an influence as well, a bit like clay pots. If the compost is trapped and can't expand in the frost, your pot is going to likely crack. So choosing the right shape might be the difference between your pot surviving the winter and not surviving the winter. Again, look for a manufacturer who gives you a frost protection guarantee. You'll quite often come across planters made out of wicker or zinc or wood. These are only really temporary ones for your garden. They're not designed to last forever. So a zinc planter might last 2, maybe 3 years before it rots. It's only a very light coating of zinc. Just check it's got drainage holes in the bottom. Most don't have, so you'll need to poke some drainage holes in it. Wood and wicker, they have plastic liners on the inside. Make sure there's some drainage holes in them. But also, when they're in the rain all the time, they quite quickly rot. So again, you'll get 2, 3, if you're very lucky, 4 years out of them.